Good morning, good afternoon, / good evening, / whatever time it is where you are. Welcome to the pilot episode 3 of the Evening Moon podcast. The Evening Moon podcast is a working title, and hopefully someday we'll come up with a decent name or I'll actually stop doing pilot episodes. My name is Ben Cowles, and I'm joined by Steve Sweeney.
Congratulations.
Got your name right this time.
Well done, Ben. I'm impressed.
Both Steve and I work for the Morning Star newspaper, and this is a podcast we've been wanting to do for ages, and we've finally started it. So we're just going to get right into it. Just to be clear that this podcast is our own opinions. Everything that we say or express in this is our own opinions, not the opinions of our employer. Just to cover our arse. Today we're going to be talking about a recent coup attempt in Venezuela. We're going to talk about a chemical weapons attack in Papua New Guinea. Alleged, or did it happen?
Well, it's alleged. We always have to be careful about these kind of things. The according to local reports, it has happened. The Indonesian government says that it's fake news.
I see. But first, we're going to talk about a story that I did.
Fab.
A story about the renters in London. And so this week, are you familiar with the London Renters Union, Steve?
I know a little bit about the London Renters Union, but it would probably be helpful for our listeners if you explained who they are and what they do, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the London Renters Union are a small. I think they're getting quite big now. Actually, are a group. They're a coalition of different housing associations that came together in the capital, merged together, and have formed the London Renters Union. I've actually been a member of them. Since they founded, I was just sort of flukily turned up to their first sort of founding meeting. Yeah, I haven't actually done very much with them, but yeah. And so they, what they try to do is try to win back some rights for renters, because the law, as we both know, is very heavily in favour of landlords and letting agencies, and renters just get screwed. And so they're trying to sort of fight back and win some rights, win some recognition from renters themselves.
It's very difficult for renters, especially in London. I mean, prices are absolutely astronomical. But the thing is, Ben, maybe you can explain a little bit more about this, is that, you know, these additional fees and the costs that people, you know, for finding a property, I don't know, most of them just seem made up. You know, they're charging hundreds of pounds just for printing off a piece of paper and stuff like that. So it pushes the costs for people up even more just to get a house in the first place.
It's ridiculous. It's a total sham. But the story that we're going to talk about is to do with this. And so the London Renters Union this week, beginning on Monday, which was January the 20th or 21st? 21st dates. January the 21st, they began this action on a letting agency who I'm not going to say the name of, although I have named them in the story, in the piece. So if you want to find them, you can find them in there. And
I could be a bit Tony Benn here and just name them, couldn't I?
You could, yes.
Because, I mean, I don't think there's any harm in naming them, because they're named in the article.
I think so.
The article in the Morning Star says that the London Renters Union claimed that Advanced Estates pushed a tenant into an agreement requiring her to pay up to 6 months' worth of rent.
Yes, that's right.
So I've named them.
Oh, there you go. So what the London Renters Union have organised is they have organised a phone banking picket against this estate agents, the
Advanced
Estates.
We can say that as a fact.
Yeah, we can say that. And so they've organised a phone picket against them. And so what they're doing is they're getting their members to call them relentlessly every day between Monday and Thursday. And then this Friday, which who knows what the date will be, that will be the 25th.
Yes, correct.
The 25th of January, they're going to picket outside on the street where they're allowed to picket, not on their property, this Friday.
Do we know where they're based?
Yes, they're based in Romford.
In Romford?
Yes, in East London.
In East London, lovely. Yeah.
And the reason that they've organised this action is because, according to Mary, who is a member of the London Renters Union, she went in to what they call it? Advanced Estates in March. And she wanted to move. She was living outside of London and wanted to move in because her family are based in Romford. So she went to this estate agent, and she claims that she was in there for 4 hours. Mary also suffers from depression and anxiety. She says that she had a panic attack while she was in there due to the stress, and that she was bullied into signing a contract. And the contract, the contract says that in order to reserve a property, she had to put down £4,800.
That's incredible.
And that was just to reserve the place, not to live in it. Just to reserve the property, she had to pay £4,800. Wow. She signed the contract, and I should say that the agency, Advance Estates, denies that they bullied her into doing this. They maintain that she signed the contract, she's already signed it, and therefore she's not owed the money back. But the London Renters Union are claiming that this is immoral and that they should pay the money back.
What's this £4,800?
£4,800
just to reserve a property.
That's right.
What does that entail? Have they broken down £4,800?
I've no idea actually, but what they said is they wanted 6 months up front. Apparently, I spoke to the landlord, and they said that Mary didn't have references, and that she was, she was from outside the area. And she's also on housing benefit. And people on housing benefit are generally screwed when it comes to these kind of things.
A lot of properties you see advertised say no housing benefit.
I think that's illegal, isn't it?
I'm fairly sure it is, but having recently been searching for properties on one of the web-based... we can't name them,
Sound
can
like
we?
BBC.
Yeah, so one of those web-based... you know the ones I mean. Yeah, you find them on the interweb.
Yeah.
But searching through those for somewhere to live, a lot of them say, there's the thing, no pets, no couples, no DSS. It's that kind of thing. So there's loads of them that say that. It probably is illegal, but
I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure that is illegal.
Yeah, but it's how you enforce. Even if something is illegal, or people are acting unscrupulously, like in this case, it's how you enforce it. The law always seems to come down the side of the landlords.
Exactly, and that's what the LRU are saying. They said that I'm just going to quote from the piece now. Something that the LRU said to me is they said that they believe that Mary's case is symbolic of many of the problems renters face in the private rented sector, including how renters on benefits are discriminated against, and how agents and landlords use Section 21 no-fault eviction orders to manipulate renters. So the LRU said that Mary's case also highlights how the law is often rigged against renters and in favour of landlords, agents and developers. What's interesting is because Mary joined the LRU told me that Mary joined them in September. Mm-hmm. So she became a member in September, and then from September to November, the union were trying to negotiate with Advance Estates. They sent them letters. That's their first action. They said they usually send their landlord or the letting agency letters to try to come to an agreement, try to recognise the union, which they generally aren't. They're generally ignored. And then they received some kind of reply from the letting agency, but they weren't happy with that. And so in December, just gone, they decided to picket outside the letting agency, which I think is a great idea. It's very brave, very bold thing to do. They stood outside the letting agency and they were handing out flyers. They were getting people to sign a petition. And some of their flyers are brilliant. And the way that they describe Mary's situation is very emotive. So it's very hard. If you take one of those flyers and read it, it'd be very hard to just think, well, she's fucked up. Because it does sound like she's being treated unfairly, according to them. And and I mean, I think it was a really interesting case. And it's very... it's definitely a situation where it's highlighting the total imbalance between landlords and renters. And
London is particularly. I guess it's a problem. Is a nationwide problem, isn't it? And we're sort of in this situation where landlords have this hold over people because there's a shortage of housing, isn't there, or shortage of affordable. They call it affordable housing. But every time I see affordable housing being built, I don't know anybody nobody I know could afford, afford to live there or buy there or anything like that. And there's this kind of shortage of council housing, isn't there? That's something that I think that the Corbyn government, or if he becomes Prime Minister, a Corbyn government would seek to address. But, it's a pretty grim situation for renters, I think.
It is, and I think something like 1 in 5 MPs are landlords, and so clearly,
Really?
yeah, I saw that on I think that was on a Channel 4 news report from 2017.
Yeah.
So maybe it's higher, although we haven't done an election since 2017, so maybe not. So yeah, according to them, 1 in 5 MPs are landlords, and so obviously they don't really have much of a interest in helping people,
No, of course not.
renters, do they?
No.
One of the things I really like about the LLU, and one of the reasons why I wanted to join, is because they were after one of their meetings I went to. They were talking about how people often don't define themselves as renters. We don't really see it as a almost like a class, I guess.
Yeah.
Class is the wrong word. It's something to
As a collective.
As a collective, yeah. They never sort of see we don't. And then when I heard them talking about that and how we all have similar problems, it's like right on.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So how do you get involved in the London Renters Union?
You go to their website, which is probably something like londonrentersunion.com.org.net. something or other.
But you can find it.
You can find it.
Quick Google search.
Google search. Other search engines are available.
Are they?
Yes, there are. But they're all not as good, probably. I quite like DuckDuckGo. You ever used DuckDuckGo?
No.
DuckDuckGo's all right.
Is it?
Yeah, it's not bad.
The one that annoyed me was Bing.
Bing's pretty shit,
It's
isn't it?
really bad.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so you can go on there and you can sign up, and I think you pay, and I don't think it's very much. But they're quite good, and they're expanding into London. But there's loads of these London renters. There's loads of these renter associations about the country. I think I saw one in Glasgow. I saw a story about one in Glasgow the other day. I can't remember what they're called, but
Well, they've got a tremendous history, haven't they? These organisations. I know in particularly in the 1930s, a time of acute housing shortage, the Communist Party led some fantastic activity with tenants' associations and rent strikes and against rogue landlords and that kind of thing. But it seems almost like we've gone full circle. We're back to we're back to that kind of situation where things are so bad that people are needing to come together collectively. And take action against rogue landlords. Good on the London Renters Union.
Yeah, nice one, guys. All right, shall we move on to the next story?
Yep.
Do you want to sing a jingle? Well, no, let's not jingle.
No.
The next story we're going to talk about is the coup. There has been a coup attempt in Venezuela, and you wrote about this. This appears in...
I didn't write about it.
Oh, didn't you? Who did?
Gulistan.
Oh, and who's Gulistan?
Gulistan is somebody who is an aspiring writer who is currently doing some work experience at the Morning Star. So she's been working with me on a few stories, she's doing all sorts of things, book reviews and interviews and all sorts of things. But she worked on this story yesterday about the coup attempt. I have to say, it sounds like a pretty rubbish coup attempt.
It does sound pretty shit.
But it's this is not an isolated incident. It's one of a string of attempts. We have to say, all backed by US imperialism, which now feels emboldened with the election of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and they've come together with this clique of right wing countries in the region. Some of them right on Venezuela's doorstep, like Colombia, for example, and they're quite. They've sort of been ratcheting up the pressure on the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro recently, particularly since his inauguration, which was in January, and I can't remember the exact date, 11th of January, I think. However, since then they've branded his election. He was elected in May last year with 67% of the vote. His closest rival, Henry Falcon, got just 21% of the vote. So it was a thumping victory. Some of the opposition groups boycotted the election. There's a very simple reason for that. I mean, they cited lack of transparency and democracy. The simple fact is that they would never win an election. So they boycotted it, called foul, and it was so they could do it and say that the elections were illegitimate. All the election observers that, including those from the US and Britain, found that those elections were fair, were free, open, transparent. They spent a long time there, speaking to people. They had open access to speak to anybody they wanted to, and everybody said that they had an equal opportunity to participate in those elections. So, but this is not good enough for for the US and for the European Union, who have ratcheted up tensions by increased sanctions on Venezuela and particularly individuals from the Venezuelan government, and they're trying to basically strangle the Venezuelan economy, much in the way that the US has done to Cuba for decades. And Venezuela is very much in the crosshair at the moment. This is, and so the latest what we saw over the weekend was this small group of soldiers who launched an attempted coup. Didn't get very far. I think they stole a couple of military vehicles, stole some weapons, and they had about an hour-long standoff with the police, who called them criminals and arrested them. So there's disputed numbers. We don't know how many. Some say as many as 40. That's the top figure, which isn't really very many.
No.
And some say around 25. What it shows, I think, is this is followed on from last week. US Vice President Mike Pence, in a telephone call to the president of the National Assembly, Juan Guaido, he said, to put this into a bit of context, the National Assembly has no real role in Venezuelan politics at the moment. It was superseded by the Constitutional Assembly, which was elected in 2017.
And wasn't there like a popular referendum on setting this constitution? This
exactly,
thing up?
Which was, all of this has been, the opposition groups tried to stop voting for the members for the Constituent Assembly quite violently. There were, the armed groups were patrolling the streets. They were putting like wires across the road, so to potentially decapitate motorcyclists. There was all sorts of things.
There was videos of people, being. I saw a video of someone who is pro Maduro being set alight and stuff. It's fucking horrible stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, this was. They were trying to stop the democratic process. But of course, in the Western media, this isn't. This doesn't have the same kind of coverage, as they try and make out that the Venezuelan government are undemocratic. They don't exactly say how. At the same time, there was a lockout by bosses. They were denying access to food and medical supplies to the Venezuelan population by locking the factories. This kind of thing. So there's been a concerted attempt to, from every side really. So they don't recognise the election of Nicolas Maduro. Mr. Maduro to me, but they don't recognise. Then they try and say, the US is refusing to recognise Mr. Maduro. What they have done, I mean, this is unprecedented. That Mike Pence has phoned this Juan Guaido and said that we recognise you as basically, the National Assembly. Made a statement saying that he is the interim president of Venezuela.
And who's he been elected by?
Exactly, nobody. This is utterly ridiculous. But the US regime under Donald Trump is utterly ridiculous, and Mike Pence has
He's also ridiculous, scary character.
Yes, very much so. So they've said that they recognise him as the interim president of Venezuela, which is laughable, because even inside Venezuela they don't. He's got no. What it showed was this coup attempt showed a handful of soldiers, a couple of dozen soldiers, in this armed uprising. By coup standards, it's pretty pathetic. But it shows that he has no popular support within the army, because he had, this has been one of the plans, is to foment this kind of rebellion against Mr. Maduro from the armed forces, who they believe can wrestle control from him and almost a military coup, and then to restore democracy, as they say. So it shows that he has no real support among the armed forces. He's trying to organise these mass mobilisations of people out on the streets, and again, not really very well supported. So there isn't, there isn't this mass support. We've seen this, but these attempts before when Hugo Chavez was president, and they made a better fist of the attempted coup against him, and he was taken away from Venezuela by helicopter. However, people came out onto the street in their masses, and they couldn't. There's no way that they could have, that they could maintain the coup. So it collapsed very soon after because of the support of the people for Hugo Chavez. Looks like a very, very similar kind of situation that we have here. But it's slightly more worrying in that the ratcheting up of the pressure is backed by US imperialism. It's backed by the European Union, both countries, by the way, who, if other countries behave in an undemocratic manner, Saudi Arabia, for example, there's no way that they'll impose sanctions or make the kind of efforts that they're doing to Venezuela. It's just governments that they don't like, and it's always tends to be progressive governments that threaten imperialist interests. Those that are going to take away the kind of the profits of big business and and redistribute that to the people of their country. That's what they don't like, because it shows that another way is possible. So that's kind of in a nutshell what's what's been going on in Venezuela. It's also worth noting that that there have been more serious attempts. There was an assassination attempt on Maduro last year at a military parade where he was attacked in a
drone attacked him or something.
It was a drone attack. I mean, it was neutralised again very quickly, but this drone attack at a military parade in Caracas. Now Maduro said that this was basically planned in Washington and they via Colombia. And I think that's where the drone came from. So they suspect involvement from the US. Donald Trump it was exposed last year that he had been considering a ground invasion. And this is the kind of thing, they build up this rhetoric to try and win support amongst the American public by portraying Venezuela as a threat to national security.
Now, it's ridiculous.
It's utterly ridiculous. But the migrant caravan, that Trump came out with all this racist rhetoric about criminals and the potential terrorists and all of this kind of nonsense that he was coming out with. One of the things that Mike Pence was saying was that it's funded by Venezuela.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's absurd. I mean, we laugh about it because it's so absurd, but it gets traction in the US. The US press and the US public will buy into this kind of stuff, and then it kind of paves the way and softens the way for that kind of military intervention. I think he was talked out of it because luckily there are some people with at least a bit of sense, militarily. I mean, I'm sure they'd love to topple Venezuela, but they probably realise tactically it's not the best, the best move to make. So this is part of this ongoing process. I don't think we've seen the end of it yet, but the Maduro government remains defiant. The Bolivarian revolution is continuing. It has the support of the masses of the people of Venezuela, and it's going to keep on, carry on ahead with its program, which is to improve the lives of the people of Venezuela. And that's, I think that's where we are with that.
I think we could do a whole podcast on Venezuela. It's so interesting, situation, what's happening there, and the US's behaviour is disgusting. What it's trying to do there. But let's move on to the next story. The next story is about a chemical weapons attack that happened in West Papua. Before we get into this, Steve, where is West Papua? And am I pronouncing it correctly?
I think you are pronouncing it absolutely correctly. So this is the story of an alleged chemical weapons attack. So it's the use. We should be clear about what it is. It's white phosphorus, which is.
Where have we heard about that before?
Where have we heard of? Well, the US have been accused of using white phosphorus, most recently in Syria, but they were also, I think they admitted to using it in Iraq.
Did they use it in Fallujah?
Yes, yeah. And I think other parts of Iraq as well, but definitely Fallujah. So this is a chemical substance that is banned for use on civilian populations. It causes intense burning. I think similar to napalm, that kind of thing. So it's a pretty horrific substance. So the allegation is that it's been used by the Indonesian military, have been using it against the people of indigenous people of West Papua, which is an independent state in the independent state of Papua New Guinea, and it's the vast island of New Guinea. So it's the western part of that, but it was annexed by Indonesia in 1969. The Act of Free Choice.
The Act of Free Choice. Usually when things are called things like that, they're not what they say they are. The Act of Free Choice.
Yeah, it's one of the US missions, isn't it?
Yeah,
they call it Operation Enduring Freedom or something like that. But this Act of West Choice really was the annexation of West Papua, which became part of Indonesia. The people of West Papua and certain groups in West Papua are not happy about that, and they've been campaigning for independence and freedom from the tyranny, as they see it, of Indonesia. So the campaign's been going on for a very long time, but since December, the Indonesian government have kind of ratcheted up the pressure and the tension. They started these air raids, and also coupled with troop manoeuvres on the ground that have gone in basically in shooting indiscriminately, according to these West Papuan freedom groups. And they say that thousands of people have been forced to flee. They're saying that there's now a humanitarian crisis because thousands of people have been forced to flee from a number of villages. So they're in the jungle without food, without water, without medical supplies. And they said, I think 3 children have died as a result of starvation. So they've called on the United Nations to intervene, and they've called on them to investigate the alleged war crimes of the Indonesian military. Of course, the Indonesian military the Indonesian government have hit back and said this is fake news, perhaps unsurprisingly. But if it's fake news, they're refusing to allow any kind of investigations into the area. They've sealed off the area where these alleged attacks have taken place, and they're refusing to allow access to NGOs, to humanitarian organisations, and to journalists. So, this is an interesting tale, because it's, again, I think one of the the United Liberation Movement for West Papua. They basically said they kept one of their spokespeople said that when chemical weapons are used in Syria, the world is horrified. And quite rightly, I think the chemical weapons are absolutely appalling, and to be used on an indigenous population is absolutely horrific. Yet nobody seems to be talking about this. It seems to be this humanitarian crisis is unfolding, and nobody's saying anything about it. I haven't seen much coverage of this in the mainstream press either. So hopefully now people will open their eyes and see what the Indonesians are actually, the Indonesian government's is actually up to in that part of the world. It's often places like that are forgotten.
Yeah, it's like usually the media covers things like this. If an official enemy does this kind of thing, like if Russia were to use chemical weapons in Syria or somewhere, we would all know about it and be the top story in every single media outlet. But if it's an ally like Indonesia, then it doesn't get covered. They're kind of the victims of those things are unpeople, as Herman and Chomsky call them. We don't hear about them. And also another thing that's quite interesting with the media is we won't hear about this because it's quite far away from Britain, although it is very close to Australia.
I was about to say that. Yeah.
And generally, what happens is the media tends to follow. They get most of their news sourced to them from the government, from government sources, and so that's why we have so much news about the Middle East, because our governments care so much about the Middle East because it has all its natural resources. And incidentally, we were talking about Venezuela just a minute ago. That has quite a lot of oil, doesn't it, Venezuela?
Well, absolutely, of course. Yeah.
And that's why we care about it.
Yeah, that's why.
Anyway, back to West Papua.
Yeah, so this is the story. This has been unfolding for the last few months now. That these kind of West Papua freedom movements. I think they seem to have quite a lot of support in West Papua. They're campaigning peacefully. They're calling for the United Nations to actually settle this. The political grievances of West Papuans, and say, look, we're committed to a peaceful dialogue. They feel that that their land was stolen and was forcibly transferred to Indonesia. They said this act of free choice. They say there wasn't really any free choice at all. They said essentially it was annexed by Indonesia. They don't want to be part of Indonesia. Now, I'm not saying that's the entire West Papua thinks that, but these organisations have a democratic right to campaign for that in a legal and peaceful manner, which is what they say that they're doing, and they're calling for the United Nations to facilitate talks and dialogue between all interested parties to resolve these what they say legitimate political grievances. Instead of doing that, Indonesia has sought to crush the movement, because I think because it's gaining quite a lot of support both inside West Papua and I think internationally as well. That people are starting to take notice of what's happening, and instead of committing to dialogue, they've decided to crush the movement. They've been activists have been charged with treason. Offices of some of these organisations have been trashed and closed down violently by our armed forces, and now this latest offensive, which has seen the military offensive and the use of chemical weapons. That's the key thing. Is this the use of chemical weapons? We have to keep coming back to that. I mean, that's a pretty serious thing to do, and it's it's a warning to anybody that's seeking to be involved in pursuing democratic, their basic rights of freedom of speech, basic democratic rights, and this is a very serious situation unfolding in West Papua, and we really should sit up and the United Nations, as they're calling for, need to do something to address this.
And this is a story that we need to keep following because it's absolutely horrific. So we need to kind of wrap things up because we've been doing this almost for an hour. You got an interview. Hopefully, you've just interviewed. Tell us about the person that you interviewed yesterday, which we should put out in full in the next couple of days. Hopefully today, if I have time.
Okay, so yesterday I interviewed my friend and comrade.
You interviewed with Gulistan as well.
With Gulistan, myself and Gulistan. Yes, we interviewed my friend and comrade Marcel Cartier. He is a hip hop artist.
Cool.
Yes. Currently based in Berlin, where he's a journalist for Redfish, who I also. That's how we kind of know each other, because I did some work for them also last year. Who Redfish make
Russian propaganda, no?
If you believe the right wing hacks that it's Russian propaganda, but they make some very good investigative documentary films. So some of them are incredibly good. But I spoke to Marcel yesterday about his forthcoming book, Serkeftin, which is a narrative of the Rojava Revolution,
which is out on February 22nd.
February the 22nd. I would highly recommend it for those that are not familiar with what's happening in that part of northern Syria and the Kurdish freedom movement. I think it's a real eye opener for a lot of people. Marcel was there for a number of weeks. He was there 2 years ago, and we spoke about his book, but also about his experiences and what he saw changing. One of the key things we spoke about was this kind of the leftists here, and Western armchair revolutionaries, he calls them in his book. Actually, armchair revolutionaries looking for this purist kind of movement. Often say that the Kurds, the Kurdish movement, and the YPG, the People's Protection Units that have been leading the fight against ISIS, they're often branded lackeys of imperialism, or tools of the US. So we kind of talk about that, and Marcel explains why that's why that's inaccurate and why the left should be supporting what's happening in northern Syria. But you can listen to the full interview on a separate podcast that will be coming out soon.
Yes, hopefully this week, probably definitely this week. And and so normally at this stage we have a silly question. I've got one, but it's quite difficult. But last time, if you listened to the last episode, we were talking about cool as fuck and cool as shit.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I think the forces of reaction have sided with you.
Of course.
I only heard from 2 people talking about it, and they both said cool as fuck. I still think cool as shit is a legitimate phrase. So here's my question for you. This is difficult. And Kadeem, the sports editor at the Morning Star, asked me this question yesterday.
Is it to do with sport?
No, it's nothing to do with sci-fi. We know we love Star Trek, but it's nothing to do with that. If you were trapped on a desert island, and you could only have one album to listen to while you're trapped there for an indefinite period of time, which album would you choose? I already have an answer because I know this is a deep question. So you can just pretend to listen to me.
I'll listen to you.
Yeah.
Go on. You tell me.
For me, I would choose the album. I would choose is called Dookie by Green Day.